Welcome, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us for the third Cutillo Park Community Meeting. My name is Lauren Bryant, for those I haven't met yet, and I'm the project manager for this project for Boston Parks. Before we jump into the presentation, I just want to go over a few how-tos and what to expect. Interpretation was not requested for this meeting, so this meeting is going to be in English only. However, for other city meetings, interpretation is available for free upon request. We also want to make sure that everyone knows that the meeting tonight is being recorded and is going to be available on the project website within about a week. So please let any of your friends or neighbors who couldn't join us tonight know that they can view the presentation and still provide feedback even if they weren't here. Next slide, please, Kevin. We also want to make sure that the conversation feels accessible to everyone and that each of you feels comfortable sharing your questions and comments. Please be respectful and mindful of others' time so that everybody has the opportunity to participate. So feel free to set up a conversation with me separately if you'd like to as well. And I'm going to put my email in the chat for those of you who may not have it. So we want to hear your thoughts on the design for the park. That's why we're here tonight. So we want to make sure that you guys know several ways that you can engage tonight. We'll be sharing a short presentation and then we'll have an open discussion afterwards. If questions pop up in your mind during the presentation, feel free to add them to the chat and we can answer them during the discussion time. And also feel free to raise your hand or any of the other Zoom functions as needed during the project or during the meeting. So on to the project now. Hopefully that's all the housekeeping information that we need to go through. I want to thank you guys again for your time tonight. We know how hard it is to take time for community meetings and that everybody's feeling meeting fatigue, and it is nice outside. So really, really appreciate your time tonight. We're going to do a quick team introduction. Then our design team is going to do a quick recap of the first two meetings for those who weren't able to join us, and also just to sort of get everybody up to speed as to how we got to tonight. They're going to then go into more depth review of the designs that we're looking at tonight, the final design. And for anyone who missed the first two meetings and wants more information than is in that summary, they are posted on the project website. So I'll also, when I get done talking, post the project website link into the chat as well. So if anybody joined a little bit late, again, my name is Lauren Bryant and the project manager for Boston Parks for this exciting park renovation. Christine Brandeo is also with us from the city and she's our community outreach coordinator. And thank you, Christine, for putting that link in the chat for me. Then the design team tonight, it's the team from Stantec, who you guys have met before. And tonight we have Kevin Butel and Adam Fearing with us. So also want to make sure people know that this meeting is specifically for the Cutillo Park renovation, and as much as we're aware of the adjacent proposed hotel development next to the park, we just want to make sure that the community knows that this meeting is not for the hotel, that it's for the park. We kicked off the park project process back on March 4th with our first community meeting via Zoom, and then had our second on April 13th. Those meetings, we really talked about the analysis of the park and shared several design concepts with you and took a lot of feedback for things that you guys were interested in, things that concerned you, things you hope to see in the park. Tonight's meeting, we're going to share a couple of design concepts for what could be at the park based on all of that feedback. And we want to gather your feedback, see if we heard you, did we get it right? Plus we want to get the community feedback on a couple of specific design ideas as well as overall park ideas. After tonight, we'll make any small tweaks based on the feedback, and then we'll create construction documents that will bid in late summer or early fall of this year. And we're hoping that construction will start this fall, with reopening the park summer or fall of next year. And then the construction cost hasn't changed since the last time we spoke, and it is $1,290,000. And with that, I'm going to stop talking and turn it over to Kevin.
Thanks, Lauren. Again, I'm Kevin Butel, landscape architect with Stantec. So for those of you that aren't aware, Cutillo Park is located here at the southern end of the north end of Boston. It's between Stillman Street and Morton Street, close to Salem Street. I don't work too far away, and I've gotten lunch on Salem Street many times. Had no idea this park was here. It's hidden away on those kind of classic small or narrow north end streets. So kind of a nice neighborhood gem of a park. So just briefly, a little bit of history. So this is the park as it exists today. We did find a fun photo courtesy of the Cutillo, Friends of Cutillo group, of this picture that was taken shortly after the park was established in the early 1900s. So again, what the park looks like today, you can see here with the trees leafed out. It's a very shady park between the trees and the surrounding buildings of the park. It's a little over a quarter acre in size, so pretty small. And then for program space, the basketball court really takes up a lot of the park currently, but there's also some play equipment and some swings. So that program space is about 2/3 of their overall park area. And then the remaining passive space, about a third of it, with seating and some foursquare that's painted on the pavement surface. When we started our analysis and our design work, we wanted to understand what was located around Cutillo. So we looked at the whole north end area to look at where there are playgrounds, what kind of age ranges do those playgrounds address, what kind of court facilities are in the area, and what kind of dog parks are around us in the north end. So some of the feedback that we heard over the first couple of meetings and in the survey that we issued, there was an interest in nature play, adult exercise, preserving the existing trees, providing a flexible lawn space, and incorporating play particularly for older kids in the kind of generally the 5 to 12-year-old range. We were also asked to maintain or preserve seating, particular for older residents, comfortable seating with backs and armrests, preserve the trees, keep things open and visible. So we're aware that there's some undesirable activity that can happen in the park. So we want to make sure that the park is as open and inviting as possible. And I guess I should say, on that front, we have been talking with the Boston Police Department. So we are planning on putting in multiple security cameras and connecting that to the Boston police system as part of this project. And I know from our early conversations with the Boston Police Department, they've said that, putting those cameras in has been very effective. So they're aware when those sorts of undesirable activities are happening, they can go out to the site, and they said pretty quickly, people figure out that that's no longer a place to hang out. And then another thing we were asked to preserve is if we find any kind of significant historic pieces, during construction, that is definitely something that we're going to want to preserve or maintain. As far as improvements, we talked about improving circulation through the park, including improving accessibility, ADA and MAV access in the park. Want to improve the quality of the courts that are there, and also improve lighting and visibility. So there is some lighting in the park now, and we'd be looking to upgrade that, or maybe not upgrade exactly, but modernize it. So put in new lights. And then increase for things to increase, some greenery. So we want to, if we have opportunities to add more vegetation in, we'd like to do that as long as it doesn't block visibility. And then we'd really like to increase the number of visitors in the park, just get more people, more eyes in the park, make it more of an active park, which I think will make it, a more enjoyable space to be in. So I was mentioning before, we did issue a survey to the neighborhood. And so we got about 80 responses. And so I'm going to walk through briefly some of the responses that that were particularly helpful in informing some of the design decisions we were making. So one of the questions we asked is, what do you currently like to do at Cutillo? And so kind of the passive, sitting and relaxing was very popular, as you can see, as well as using the playground equipment. And then about an even split among the respondents we got for dog walking, playing basketball, using the court for other purposes, or just general miscellaneous purposes in the park. Which entrance do people enter from most often? So Stillman Street is by far the most common way people enter the park. And so you'll see in a few minutes here that did prompt us to make some adjustments to our design concept to acknowledge the fact that a lot of people come from that Stillman Street edge. Of the respondents, most people preferred the half court to the full court. And that's one of the, Lauren mentioned we had some specific questions for people tonight. That is one of the specific questions. And we have two concepts that I'll walk through, one with a full court and one with a half court. So we wanted to kind of explain to you our thinking as far as what kind of, if we went with a half court, what kind of opportunities does that present in the park? What can we do with that extra space we have? Do you prefer an open plaza or a plaza filled with seating? There was about a 50-50 split in the survey for that. What type of seating do you prefer in the park? Again, a pretty even mix between kind of more traditional benches, tables and chairs, or platform seating. So it seemed to us that there was a desire for multiple types of seating within the park. And then which park elements are most important to you? So the most popular option was nature play or incorporating natural materials into the park. Flexible lawn space was also very popular, as was expanding or extending the play areas within the park. And adult exercise was another popular option. Water play and dog area had some interest, but those were at the lower end of all the options that we asked for responses to. So when we started the design, we were trying to create a framework for the park layout. And so this is very generally the approach we were trying to take, where we wanted to shift the court off of Morton Street. So we have a buffer and entry areas both along Stillman and Morton. And we wanted to preserve all of the trees in the park, with one exception. There is one female ginkgo tree that drops fruit, which when it rots can have a pretty unpleasant smell. So that is a tree we're looking to remove and likely replace with a new tree. So diagrammatically, this is how we were thinking about some of the spaces. If we went with a full court, certainly, where we've got the court generally in this area, plaza spaces for seating along both Morton and Stillman, an adult exercise area, flexible synthetic turf lawn space, and a play area for kids. And I guess one thing I should say is, well, I guess I'll get to that a little bit later, but just because we identified this, certain areas of the park for play, I think we can make playful elements throughout the park. So that's something that we're going to try to do. And along those same lines, we do not have a dog area in either of the concepts anymore, but we are aware that a lot of dog owners come through the park, and so we are making provisions for them. So we're going to be adding in a drinking fountain. We'll make sure it has a doggy dish. We'll have a bag dispenser located in the park. So just because we don't have a designated area for dogs does not mean that we're not trying to design with dogs or their owners in mind. So this is the first concept, obviously the one where we've got that full court, and I'll walk you through the different programmatic elements of this concept. And then we'll start showing you kind of side-by-side comparisons, the full court concept with the half court, and kind of explain to you what the similarities and differences are between those two. So for the court, like we've talked about at previous meetings, we want to make sure it's a good court for basketball, but we also want to make sure it's as usable as possible for purposes other than basketball. So we can do some fun things just with the court painting and patterning. So we can make it more fun and playful for kids. We could have a place for a trike loop for kids to ride around on that, or if somebody wanted to learn to ride a bike, there could be a perimeter path that gets painted on the court to help indicate that. It could be used for sketching, hopscotch, foursquare, those sorts of things, or just sort of fun patterns to engage kids and clearly let them know that this is a space for everybody and kind of invite them into the court, again, when it's not being used for basketball. For the play zones, this area here is where we were, intending to have the most intensive play area. So it's a small park. We're using, a corner of the park for play. So one of the strategies we had was looking at play towers. So looking at play equipment that has where the play goes up rather than out to make best use of the limited square footage we have available in the park. But I think under any scenario we do, I think we are going to be looking at incorporating in natural materials, wood and stone in the play area or areas, and not necessarily so natural play. We're not looking at any kind of loose materials. That's something that from a maintenance standpoint doesn't really work. So we're going to be, some of these photos we're showing here show sand or bark mulch, but I just want to make sure that it's clear to everybody that our intention is to go with a different kind of safety surfacing. So either a rubber safety surfacing or potentially synthetic turf. And we can talk about that a little bit more later on in the presentation. But another thing we'd like to do, so whatever we do with the play areas, we want to make sure that some of that equipment has movement in it. So with this limited footprint, we didn't feel that we had enough room for a swing, but we do have enough room to put in a small, spinner piece of equipment, something that kids can get on and other kids can get around and kind of turn that around, as well as, some climbing equipment, the play tower, like I was explaining. Synthetic turf lawn area. So this could be used for multiple purposes. So it could be, a flat, flexible space for picnicking, for, working out or having, small exercise classes. But we also could, make it a little fun or playful, particularly at the edge where it meets the play zone, where we could play with the topography a little bit, make it a little bit more fun and playful for kids of all ages. So another specific question we have is, what kind of, given that we're going to be having some sort of, firm safety surface within the play area, is there a preference for the more common rubber safety surface that's used in a lot of the Boston city parks? Or is there interest in, a synthetic turf surface? Sometimes those turf surfaces can get pretty hot in the sun, but because this is such a shady park, we really feel like it could be a good fit here. It has, admittedly, it's not natural, but it does have that kind of more natural look to it. And with all of the shade, that would really mitigate any kind of temperature issues. And then we also thought that that could be nice rather than cutting up the park into a bunch of different types of materials, because the play area is adjacent to that synthetic turf lawn area, to have that same material carry through both areas could be a nice thing to do. So these are some photos just showing you of what that could look like on the right-hand side here. For plaza areas, so we did, like I was saying, pull things back from Stillman to create a more substantial seating, flexible seating zone along that edge, as well as plaza seating space along Morton. So you can see they're fairly comparable in size, so a little bit of a different configuration, but about the same area, about the same seating capacity. Here along Stillman, as exists today, we're proposing to put new benches, backed benches with armrests between the trees, facing in towards the park. But then I think we've got this nice entry area here as well, where we can receive people, have some seating. There's an opportunity where we could add in some more vegetation, some more planting into the park here as well. And then along Morton, we've got an entry plaza here. So again, pulling the court off of both streets to help receive people into the park. But then with all of the trees that are here, we thought that we could do potentially some sort of elevated decking system. So we could get rid of a lot of the pavement and give the tree roots more room to grow, but at the same time have a firm surface for people to occupy at the same time. So that seemed like a good way to balance both the needs of the neighborhood and the needs of the trees. An adult fitness area is located here in the corner. So there are a couple of different directions we could go with the adult fitness. So I think we've got enough space where we could get in a reasonably large, single piece of exercise equipment that has multiple functions in it. We've put these in a couple of parks recently. And one of the reasons we like it is because to a kid, it looks like play equipment, and to an adult, it looks like exercise equipment. So it's flexible that way, which is nice, particularly given the limited space we have here. Anything we can do to make spaces multifunctional, multi-purpose would be good. But we can take a similar approach with smaller pieces of individual equipment. But we don't really have room for both. I think the choice is, do you go with one piece of equipment or multiple smaller pieces of equipment? So if people have a preference, we'd be interested in hearing your thoughts tonight. So this is the second concept. So kind of at a glance, fairly similar to what we had before, but obviously we've got the court here is a half court, and we've also rotated it. So it's got a little bit of a different orientation. So I'll go through now and kind of walk through the different elements again, but making a direct comparison with the concept that I was just walking you through with the full court and this second alternative with the half court. So the court areas, like I was just saying, we've got the full court here, the half court. So one of the advantages of changing the orientation of the half court is that it will really reduce the amount and the height of fencing that we need to put in the park, which will be, I think, a really nice improvement from a visibility standpoint. That, that chain link, although you can see through it, it does create a little bit of a visual barrier. And I think it just makes the park a little bit more inviting and pleasing to be in when you don't have a lot of tall chain link fence in it. And we've got a diagram right here that shows that. So, we want to make sure that we're keeping the balls within the park, within the court here. So the red lines here indicate 10-foot high fencing for ball control. We can break that a little bit where we have room, so we can, instead of making it a wall of fencing, we can offset that fencing so you can have a little bit more of an easy way to get in and out of the court. Again, to make it a little bit more inviting, whether you're playing basketball or using it for other activities. But then this darker purple color would be 4-foot fencing. So again, on the court, helps with ball control to help corral the bulk of the balls that are being used in here, but at a lower height. And then around the play area here, you can see that we've got fencing here along Stillman. So the idea being to make sure that the youngest kids don't have an easy way to escape out onto the street, to kind of keep them focused more internally in the park. And then you can see here, excuse me, for the half court option, we really don't need to have any 10-foot high fencing. So the wall here of the building has very few windows, so we won't need any fencing there for ball control. And so we can have these lower fences along the side of the court, and then do a similar kind of configuration of the fencing for this play area here.
Kevin, I'm just going to jump in really quickly, sorry, on this slide. So one of the other things that would be great to get everyone's opinion on once we open up the discussion, because there were already a couple questions in it in the chat, are, currently the playground is fully fenced in. And right now what we're, potentially looking at is just a partial fence to keep kids from running straight into the street. So we'd like to get your opinions on whether you guys think that's a good idea, whether you think it should be fully enclosed. And so that's something to think about as we're going through this too.
Thanks. And so here, a few photos of different types of fencing. So I think everybody's got a pretty good idea of what chain link fencing looks like. We can do different types of fabric. So chain link fence can look a little bit dressier if the fabric spacing is a little bit tighter. Or we can do something where you can do a welded wire fabric fence. And so those can be a little bit more colorful. They can be powder coated different colors. So a little bit more expensive, but not prohibitively expensive. So that's another thing that we were considering for the park. For the play areas, you can see that there is a little bit of a trade-off between court space and play area. So with the half court option here, it does allow us to expand the play opportunities. So we've got space in this area here for a larger play tower that could go in. And then that frees up more space we have in this corner here where we think we've got enough space where we could fit in a swing, as well as some of the other equipment, we've been talking about, a small spinner. We could also put in a small play structure that's geared more for younger kids as well. So there is certainly an opportunity for more play areas with that half court option. And these are the types of structures that we're currently thinking about. So something that's got a limited footprint and is sculptural. And we're also looking at different types of materials. So we could go with, steel climbing structure like this helical one on the left, or we could look at ones with a wooden frame like you're seeing on the right-hand side. And then we've got, for the younger kids, if that's something that the community desires, we've got different types of small play structures for the young kids to give them opportunities to climb and slide in the play zone. And like I was saying before, I think in either of these concepts, we'll definitely be looking at incorporating as much natural materials, particularly in the play zone as we can. So wood, stone, and creating it so not play pieces per se, but kind of informal elements within the park that kids can sit on and climb on. And then for the swing, this is the type of swing that we're considering. So a single dish swing, which is a little bit more accessible for kids with mobility issues and can also accommodate more than one child at a time, if that's something that the kids would like to do. And like with some of the other play equipment I was just showing, we do have the option of going with more of a powder coated steel or a more natural material wood framed structure. The synthetic turf lawn is really very similar in both schemes in terms of size and our ability to incorporate, some sort of landform potentially in those. And like I was saying before, we are looking at, potentially expanding that same synthetic surface into the play zone, if that's something that people would like to see. And then the adult fitness, same footprint in both of these schemes in the lower right corner of the park. You can see the plaza spaces in both schemes. The configurations are a little different, but not a whole lot different. I think, in the broad strokes, they're very similar in terms of what you get in the full court or the half court option, as well as, the square footage of area is pretty comparable in terms of what we're providing along both Stillman and Morton streets. And so for the type of seating, again, we're looking at a variety of different types of seating. So backed benches with armrests, tables with movable chairs, movable within a limited range, not chairs that people could walk away with. And then bench seating as well, or platform seating. And then again, these natural materials could be used as informal seating as well. So again, these are, the full and half court options for you guys to consider. And then I think I'll leave it here for Lauren. I think there was something you wanted to talk about on this last slide, right?
So this will be at the very end after discussion.
Oh, sorry.
That's
My
okay.
mistake. So I think with that, we'll open it up to everyone's questions and comments.
Would anyone like to jump in with comments? We could start looking at the chat. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, yeah, I think the chat probably is a good place to start with the synthetic lawn, just in terms of what the intent is for using that space. Because if it's going to be intended for young children, then it should probably just be officially part of that space. Because I know if there's something dedicated for children, I'm probably not going to go in there and sit or bring my dog or whatever it might be. But if it's intended for adults to lounge and sit or do, yoga class or whatever it might be, which I'm not, that might be a bit of a pipe dream, but maybe. Yeah, because I think dog use will absolutely be an issue, and people might not want to let their child roll around on the turf if it's just open.
Sure.
I see that David has his hand up. Did you have a comment too?
Yeah, hi. I agree with that last comment. I'm a little worried about that lawn area as well, and unless it's specifically programmed, I'm not sure how it will be used, except possibly by dog owners and dogs. And I think if that's the case, it needs to be restricted from having dogs in that area for the reason cited. You mentioned at every meeting that this park design is not related at all to the hotel, and yet I get worried. I see so many elements of the design that suggest some kind of an integration with, or an interface with, the proposed hotel. For instance, especially with the full court concept, the noisier activity areas are pushed towards the residents on Stillman Street and away from what may be a hotel in the future. Also, the Bosque Plaza area, that seems to line up, maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to line up with the dining space, the restaurant space, which may have outdoor tables close to Morton Street. And I wonder whether that entry plaza on Morton is lined up with the proposed passageway in the hotel project plans, current plans. So I just worry that I see so many elements here that suggest interface with the hotel, and maybe I'm totally wrong. And I also wanted to bring up the elephant in the room is of course Morton Street. And what, if any, thoughts does the Parks Department have with respect to the future of Morton Street? What is the preference of Boston Parks for the future of Morton Street? And the last thing I'll say for now is surface colors. In some of those sketches or photos, there was some very bold colors, and that may work in portions of larger parks, but in such a small park, I would like to see natural surface colors. And that's it.
So there was a lot there. Kevin, do you want to talk to some of the design portions, and I could try to jump in on some of the Morton Street portions?
Sure. We're trying to, it's a little bit of a balancing act. So we are not designing specifically for the hotel. I don't believe that we are, but we are trying to acknowledge that, that very well may be, a significant change to that edge. And, particularly with a pedestrian cut through, I think it would be, it's the responsible thing to do to respond to that, that the park needs to acknowledge, that if that, will exist in the future. So it is a balancing act that way. So, and then as far as there was certainly no intent on our part to push, noisier elements of the park away from that Morton Street edge. The court is moving a little further away from Morton Street, but I think it's not a very nice way to enter the park from that, from the Morton Street side, when you have that 10-foot high chain link fence kind of walling off the street from the park. So that was really the primary impetus for us to move it. And then, we are changing the current swings that are in the lower right portion of the park to adult fitness, but the play zone area is really equivalent to where it is today. So I think those are my initial thoughts from a design standpoint.
So Kevin, this is a question that just because it came up from David right now. If the community were leaning towards the half court option, and I'm not saying that they are, but is there a scenario if they like the half court version, but the court closer to Stillman is a concern, could the court shift towards Morton, still be off of it from a perspective of lowering fences on park edges so that the width of Stillman doesn't, or the width of Morton doesn't feel as narrow still, to kind of try to help with that feel. But could the play tower move to the opposite side if that's a concern? Although honestly, children on a play tower, it's not no noise, but would that configuration at all work? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I'll also, curious to know what Adam, who is also on the design team, thinks. But yeah, I don't see any reason why, that couldn't shift. There'll be some changes, might need a little bit more fencing, but I don't see anything where that would be, a difficult change to make, certainly.
And then the other thing in terms of Morton Street, as you guys know, it's not a Boston Park street, so we have no control over what happens on Morton Street. When you ask what our ideal would be for it to not be filled with rats and trash, right? It is definitely not something that is a positive for the park. It's not a positive for park users. It's something that we have been trying to have conversations for a while to try to push in a more positive direction. But the ultimate decision about what happens there is not up to parks, but it is something that we would like to see improved. But even if it were up to parks, it wouldn't be up to me, right? So I can't speak for the parks commissioner. But I do know that in the future, we would really truly like it to be something that does not detract from the park like it does today.
Are you at least working with Public Works to improve Morton Street, even if it has to stay as a street of sorts? At least it should be improved. It's a horrible thought to think about spending all that money to improve the park and still have that horrendous looking street right next to it.
We are definitely having conversations with them. They have their own budgets, their own projects, their own cycles, but we are definitely talking with both them and with ISD and inspectional services in terms of all of the issues with rats and trash and other things. So we are coordinating with other departments, but we can't make any decisions on their behalf or push them to do anything, but we are trying to have those conversations. Looking at the chat, I don't know if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free, but scrolling back up, there was a question about the Morton Street entrance. I think the Morton Street entrance would be used as much, if not more, than Stillman if it were not used as a storage space for trash receptacles. And I would 100% agree. Concern that the court is in front towards Stillman Street, which gives more hiding behind it towards Morton Street for bad activity, since most people access from Stillman. Kevin, I don't know if you want to address
Yeah,
line
so
of sight on that.
Yeah, so I think wherever the court will go, it will not create any kind of visual obstructions. So, and for that matter, we will not create any visual obstructions anywhere within the park. So if we're going to be putting in any kind of plant beds, it would be ground cover or canopy trees only. And we wouldn't put in any kind of, features that would significantly, block views. I think, the one kind of maybe minor, exception would be, we're talking about the play equipment, which will have some verticality to it. So those might screen some areas to a very limited extent. But I think between that, keeping the views as open as we possibly can, and with the security cameras that are going to go in, I think it's going to make a huge difference to the park in all but eliminating those undesirable activities that are currently happening.
There's also a question of whether the turf would attract dogs relieving themselves compared to the rubber surfacing, which I think goes back to potentially the fencing question as well. Oh, and then there was the question which says, would the synthetic turf be fenced in if not a rubberized surface might be more practical given the amount of dog traffic? Kevin, do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good comment. I think that's probably, it would not be surprising if that's, the reality of how it were used, if, dogs would, relieve themselves in that area as much or more than anywhere else in the park. So, so that's certainly something we can take a look at, I think, but whatever we do with the design, we are still going to have dogs and dog owners coming to the park. So I don't think that, we're trying to, address that as best we can. So, make sure that there are dog dispensers conveniently located to give people every opportunity to clean up after their pets. But, the design can only impact people's behavior so much.
I think we also wanted to incorporate some way to maintain the turf, as if there's a water fountain, that it could have a hose bib connection that maintenance staff could use to perform like cleaning, physical cleaning. And this is just like learning to use synthetic turf. It's a different material. Dogs would definitely use the bathroom on it. But then there's that sort of hose down cleaning, but that's again a maintenance issue. But that it wouldn't be this forever problem of hopefully of this saturated dog stuff.
I think if there's a concern of dogs relieving themselves on the synthetic turf, then we don't put synthetic turf in the park.
Or you put up signs, no dogs allowed. I mean, that seems to work in play areas around the city.
Not as much as we'd like, unfortunately. Okay, well, let's talk about the turf in a little bit. There was a comment that said, I'd prefer as little fencing as possible on Stillman and fewer play spaces if given a choice between the two options. So that's in conflict with some of the comments that we heard about expanding play previously. But does that mean, this one came from Mary Beth Sweeney, do you mind expanding on that? And are you saying you would prefer the play areas to not be fenced in order to have less fencing? Or I just want to make sure I understand the thoughts. Oh, you're muted, Mary Beth.
There was a slide that was shown that, yeah, on number 2, having the play tower and the play zone. I would say given between, an open space in 1 versus 2, basically I'm saying I would prefer 1 rather than having, 2 broken up play spaces. Because as of now, we're lucky if the play space gets any use by young children. And I mean, I don't know, you all probably know better than me. I think this is somewhat of a case of if we build it, they will come, hopefully. But in terms of just how apartment sizes around here, we unfortunately don't have too many families with more than 1 child. So, and there are, there's the Prince Street playground, but so that's kind of where I was getting at between the two. And then just in terms of that Stillman Street, I think we all agree that that fence is pretty off-putting when you're walking down Stillman. So just to be able to, it would just open up the space so much more to have and the sidewalk is so tight and so small. And then there's this big fence that just is very unwelcoming. So yeah, that's what
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Kevin.
I was just going to say that is our hope, that we can get rid of that park edge fence
That
along
exterior.
Stillman, and that we might need to have, some, hopefully lower fencing kind of internal to the park. But yes, I think that is definitely something we would like to do, is eliminate that fence on that edge.
And
But
Mary
we
Beth,
also want to make sure that we're not allowing cars to drive in either. So
Yep.
Mary Beth, the comment that I had made earlier about potentially shifting the play tower and the court in the half court, therefore the play would be maybe less disjointed, if that's the right word, maybe less separated. Would that not solve, but is that less concerning? Because the reason I ask is the play tower is for those older kids that you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I know, just as someone who walks by through quite a bit, I want to keep myself and my dog away from the play areas. So if we have two big, play spaces, I'm respectful of children or the adults playing, and I stay clear of it. So I would rather have it all contained.
Okay.
Given it would be a different story if there was tons of kids there all the time, but there just isn't. So, the fear is that we're going to have empty playgrounds.
Mm-hmm. So then going down the comments, just I think this gets into what you're saying too, Mary Beth. Kirsten, I'm sorry, I know I get that wrong probably every time, was saying that she agrees with your comment and is thinking that we're trying for too much activity in a small space, and that she would cut activities and increase the quality of each included element. So that being said, that was one of the things when Kevin was showing that survey, we took out the dog area, we took out the water play. So we were already trying to do that a little bit, but it sounds like that's something you're interested in doing more. So I'd be curious to hear from everyone if elements came out that are in these plans, whether it's one or two, because they have the same elements, right? They're just different proportions. What those elements are that people would be interested in not having, right? Because all of these were things the community was interested in already. So I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think, thanks, Lauren. I think since one of the primary desires of the community was for passive use areas, that's what a lot of people use the park for. I think you should consider increasing the natural passive use areas, the seating areas, decreasing the play areas. I don't think you need 2 play areas. Maybe I don't think the synthetic turf is a particularly good idea. It's very maintenance dependent, and maybe, a hard surface and a seating area, but you got a limited budget. And so if some of the, activity areas are decreased, maybe the quality of each one could be increased. But just thinking about one of the comments of the community, passive use areas, I think is really important. And as to fencing, I think maybe apart from the basketball court where there's a concern about things bouncing around, maybe consider bollards or planters, that would also prevent kids from running out into the road, and instead of fencing, because I think the fencing, is something that's very undesirable now. And then just to kind of second something that Dave said, the trash along Morton Street, I think you guys know this, and hopefully the Parks Department can use any leverage with the city and our mayor and our new mayor, because the condition of Morton Street is just gonna make all this worthless.
I definitely understand the concerns about Morton and doing what I can in my position to try to push that forward. That's probably the best I can. So I hear you and I'm trying.
And we will, the neighborhood, I think 100% of the North End neighborhood will help you. And we all know that that trash along Morton Street shouldn't be there. That's an illegal agreement that somebody's predecessor entered into. So with our new, we're going to have a new mayor, and hopefully it will be easier with a new regime in there. But I think if we all get together, we can, with our elected officials, we can maybe convince somebody that just can't be like that.
So while we're talking about decreasing activities potentially, it sounds like the synthetic turf is potentially one of those. What does everybody think about the exercise equipment? Because that was definitely pretty high up on the list that people talked about, and as the survey. So I'm just curious for those here, what people are thinking about that as well.
With respect to what specifically? The type of equipment or what?
Or I think if that, and do you think it's important? Is that one of the programmatic elements that we should consider cutting?
I do think it's important. I think it's going to be used. I think there are a lot of people in the area, young and old, that would want something like that there. And I think it will certainly get a lot more use than that turf lawn will. I'm not sure what kind of use will be on the turf lawn.
Could we, Kevin, while we're talking about the exercise equipment, go back to the slide that shows those different types? Because while we're talking about it, I'd be curious what people's take is on, a larger structure that has a lot of different components on it versus a couple of smaller ones. And I'm just curious if people have opinions on that are in the call.
I don't use them, and
I don't either.
But I think it's better to have the individual equipment as opposed to this one piece. And I understand that there can be multiple uses of the one piece, but I don't know, just the look of it alone, the individual pieces seem to be more attractive as well.
Maybe less intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
I do agree. I think I do like the space for it because it is very secluded back there. I mean, ideally Morton Street would be spruced up a little bit more, so it's more inviting. But it is a very kind of private area. That's why there's a lot of, drug use back there. And the hope is that we have early morning folks in there and in the evening. And so in terms of the equipment, I guess it just depends on maybe the number of use it, I don't know. And I don't know if sometimes I've seen them come with like little instructions on what to do with whatever piece. So I think just having something that's universal and appealing and that will draw people in, and hopefully word will spread that there's a great, workout area there. I know there's some groups that use the Greenway, and DeFilippo Park gets tons of folks.
Mm-hmm.
They usually go to the children's park and use their jungle gyms. So hopefully word will spread. So.
Okay, well, thank you. And if anybody else has any other opinions about a single versus multiple, please feel free to add those into the chat too. And we'll take all of that stuff into consideration as we move forward. Going back up to the, let's see. There's a question that says, how about a half court option with more open space instead of additional play structures? I'm concerned that with the half court option, more play space has been added, not passive space. Would it be possible to add more passive space? Also, what is the restraining force of having the half court on the Morton Street side? And I think with that one, sort of, if you see, and this is what I was asking Kevin about earlier, if you see where the court is in the full court option, I was sort of wondering if the half court moved to that same sort of level, and then it would be pulled off of both streets, because with the fencing that is required even on the half court on those two edges, we're trying to pull that fencing, and it was another question that was in the chat about the existing fencing along the street edges. We want to open that back up like it used to be more historically. And we don't want that tall fencing along the edges on the street. So our thought was pulling it back off of either street allows that edge to not have that high court fencing. And if it were a full court, like Kevin showed, the fencing would need to be higher than if it were the half court. But either way, I think we can look at how to address that concern that's been raised tonight. Let's see. Yes to not neon colors on the court. Agree about natural surfacing colors. Noisier spaces should definitely be moved to the Morton Street side away from the residents on Stillman. So I think that we can look at some of those things, Kevin.
Yeah.
Wouldn't the noise of basketballs hitting the wall on Stillman abutters drive them crazy? Is that I'm thinking that's in response to the half court option.
Yeah.
And
Because the hoop would be right against the wall. And it was mentioned that, sorry if there's an echo, that there are windows there. So the windows wouldn't break, but I'm not sure what's on the other side of the wall. I mean, there's units there.
so there's an open courtyard on the back side of it, right? Where
a portion of it is open, and then up, there's a full apartment building.
Mm-hmm. But I think, Kevin, where you're looking at that, if it were to shift, that would be where the courtyard is, right?
That's true. Yeah.
But I think what we really need to decide, I think, before everything else can fall into place is a half court versus full court. And I think getting people's opinions on that, sort of understanding what the parameters are, what kinds of spaces are left available for passive or other things. I think it would be good to understand people's thoughts on the half court versus full court. And again, if you would rather put it in the chat, it's completely fine.
I had thought half court, really early on, just because of the sheer use. It's very rare that currently both basketball hoops are in use. So that had been my number one driving factor.
The reason you don't see full court basketball games is because one of the hoops is not regulation. It's about 2 feet below where it would have to be. So no serious basketball player would go to Cutillo for a full court game.
That's good to know, Dave. Thank you. That hadn't been brought up to us, or to me before at least. Sorry, my husband is apparently doing some work with a saw in the basement, so I'm going to mute myself. Anybody else have any thoughts on half versus full court?
Yeah, hi. I agree with Dave. As someone who's played basketball in the North End, I agree that this is one of the older and less well-maintained courts, especially given the new court over on the waterfront. It's not going to be a great place regardless of how big it is right now. So, I prefer the full court option, I think designing it, like you said, with, paint that supports or encourages other uses is a good idea to maybe encourage some other use on the second half if the first court isn't in big use. But yeah, that's what I think.
Thank you. That's great.
And what are the other uses?
That's a good question. So one of the things that we had looked at, and it's a little hard to see, but there's, if you see, there's like a lighter border around the I'm like pointing at it with my mouse. You can't see that. There's a lighter border around the outside. That could be something like a toddler tricycle track, or like kids learning to skateboard. My daughter does that. She's almost 9. She does that in basketball courts a lot, where she'll take her skateboard and kind of go around the outside. So it could be a little track for kids. to run or to use their bikes. There's 4 square courts that could be painted. You could do hopscotch, you could do any of those kind of pavement type markings, which I know there have in the past been some at Cutillo. Some of them are pretty worn right now, but those type of court activities. Kevin, do you have any others that you were thinking of?
I think one of the other ones would be just kind of interesting patterns, and we could do that certainly with more kind of muted natural colors to just kind of facilitate open-ended play. If you had polka dots, kids could jump from dot to dot, or if you had different colored dots, they could have, maybe would indicate different sorts of routes. So there's different ways that we could just try to encourage more kind of open-ended creative play with some relatively simple painting patterns.
And might there be more of that type of activity, and also less competition with those wanting to play full court basketball if you kept the full size space, the full court space, but utilized only half of it as a half court and the other half for other activities only?
I wonder if there's a way, Kevin, that we could sort of encourage one side to be a half court where we still, like, I wonder if there's a way with the painting, if like the key was just lines on one side, but it was color and lines on the other side, and you still had hoops, but maybe on one side you had more other court activities. So it was still possible to play, but that it encouraged, if someone were going to play half court, which court it would be. I don't know if you've ever seen that done.
No, but it's certainly something that could be done.
I don't know if that's sort of a best of both worlds with that potentially. The other, just looking back at the chat, Andrea asked if and it's not a silly question, will all of the existing fencing be removed? So we didn't talk about that, but the plan is that with the full park renovation, all of the existing fencing would be removed. And with that diagram that Kevin had shown earlier, that those would be the places that we would put new fencing back. So that's definitely not a silly question. Sorry, we weren't clear on that. And the concern about synthetic turf causing burns if children fall on it. People liking the idea of removing the perimeter fencing. Exercise equipment, think that it'll get used by young adults. Yes to exercise equipment. Survey for the actual type of equipment for exercising. Prefer the half court with more passive open space. Agree with Kristen, half court with more open space. I believe there's definitely a strong demand for an adult fitness area. That's great. Okay. Okay, well, I think we've gotten to all the questions. Sorry if there was one in there I missed, but please also feel free to continue jumping in. I just didn't want to not address something someone had put in the chat earlier.
Okay, I will jump in again.
Please do.
And
that's why we're here.
A totally different topic.
Okay.
Right, I understand that there currently is at least one access from a private building directly into the park. And it may be the one associated, yeah, right there.
Exactly.
And I don't know, it just doesn't seem right that there should be, unless it's an and should it be just an emergency access? There's no other reason for access at that location other than emergency.
My understanding, and I'm not there every day, clearly, I don't see its use every day. But my understanding is that it is for emergency egress only, and it was required as part of building code. But I also know, as a parent, I would find it really weird to have a door that opens into the play zone, which is why, if you guys can see on these two plans, we had pulled the play back so that it wasn't emptying out directly into a play zone. And that's why we had put that sort of into that synthetic turf area, which I know we may turn into something else. But there is actually an easement for an emergency egress there.
But I also understand that it's been used for non-emergency purposes.
And that's what I was saying. It wouldn't surprise me, but I haven't seen that happening.
It does get used. They eat lunch out there, the employees of Going Bananas.
Do they? Okay. That's
They
good to know.
sit on the step. I've seen the door propped.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. That's good to know. Like I said, not being there, I just don't know those things. So thank you.
Is there any area within this park where seasonal garden would survive, floral garden would survive? Even if they're in urns or containers as opposed to on the ground?
I think there's probably lots of places where they would survive, but I think the plant selection would have to be, tailored to the shady environment.
And typically, if we have any ornamental planting, it's not something that Parks has the staff to maintain. But if it's something that the Friends of Cutillo wanted to potentially take on in terms of that level of detail, like we've done that in the South End, Child Hassan Park, we have a memorandum of understanding with the Friends group, and we did install more detailed planting that they take care of. So if that's something that the Friends group is interested in, we could talk about that. And Kevin, potentially we could identify some areas, and it may even be that we just identify the areas and the Friends plant and maintain, but we could definitely have that conversation if the Friends wanted to get in touch with me about that.
Yeah, so we did put some planters there.
Yeah.
And we do have plants in them. So so apart from a permanent commitment to maintaining them, which, we could determine whether we could do or not, one of the issues is availability of water. So it would be easier, if there was a water faucet in the park where the neighbors could use that to maintain plants. But so one issue is maintenance, and another issue is obviously, what is the, and I hate to mention the neighboring development, but what is going to be the impact of shadow, and and maybe not just that development, but other adjacent developments as well.
Right.
Impact on plants. I think it's a pretty thorny issue to ensure permanent maintenance and also kind of have the area around in flux. But
right, and that's sort of how we feel with the park design, like Kevin was alluding to earlier. For us, it's hard to make those kinds of decisions too, with moving forward with the park and not knowing what's happening, and making sure that we don't want to have detrimental impacts to the park because of something that might happen next door that we don't think about. So we want to be cognizant of it, especially like you said, in terms of shade and other things. It worries me, and it's part of why we're not putting in a natural lawn area, right? It's already a really shady park as it is. And wanting to make sure that we are conscious of the fact that it's shady to begin with. But I think let's talk a little bit more about some planting areas, if that's something that's of interest. The other thing, Kevin, a bit more about the water supply, but clearly we have water supply we're going to have water supply if we're talking about drinking fountains. And would assume that we could put in a hose bib, even if it had a key to it that could be locked, that could only be used by the Friends group for watering, as opposed to, sometimes we've had an issue with showering or other things with hose bibs, but just with the waters. But we could potentially do something like that if the Friends group is interested.
Yeah, that would certainly be an easy and inexpensive thing to incorporate into the design.
Kirsten, you may have more thoughts on this because you do such a good job with holiday decorations, but would now be probably the time to suggest some sort of a storage space for the Friends group, like to put holiday decorations or any other kind of like folding tables if there was going to be cleanup days.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's a great idea. So right now we have done holiday decorations and they're stored kind of in a little corner of the basement of 26 Stillman, which obviously isn't really sustainable. So some sort of small storage shed would be helpful.
Kevin, I'm just gonna keep throwing things at you. With the fact that we are looking at the Bosque Plaza with raised sort of seating there, right, surrounding those trees, is there any way to incorporate something into that, or is it not a tall enough area?
I don't, the challenge with making that, raising that height relative to the areas around it is, I think we'd want to make an accessible connection up to that higher elevation. So the higher it is, the harder it is to make that accessible connection. So
That makes sense.
I think that would be challenging to do. However, I don't know, it's just my initial thought. I think there is that adult fitness area that's already got some kind of visibility, issues, just in terms of its, like was the comment that earlier, tonight, that it's a little kind of tucked away, and for that reason, kind of nice for adult fitness because you don't feel like you're on display for everybody to see. But if we did want to put in some sort of container, maybe putting something somewhere in that area, it wouldn't create another sort of obstruction in the park. It's sort of tucked away, so there might be a relatively easy way to have a decent amount of storage space, maybe in that corner. But if that's something that everyone wanted to do, I'm sure we could find a spot for it.
Kirsten, would you be able to give us a general size of how much? I mean, I love holiday decorating, so I can picture big amounts of spaces, but it would be great to sort of understand, if we were to try to incorporate something, what size the Friends group would be looking for.
Yeah, I would think relatively small, maybe. I think the area in the basement is between 4 feet by 4 feet. It must be around 4 feet by 4 feet, and then part of what's down there is kind of a tool to do watering of the plants that we wouldn't need if there was a water feature. So it's basically just cleaning equipment, garbage bags, holiday decorations. So not a large space at all, unless there was interest of the community in having a space that was available to people to store things like basketballs and play equipment. But that that of course has its own issues, because then you have risk of loss and all of that sort of thing if you open it up to everybody, but not a very large space.
Okay. So Kevin, is there anything that we didn't touch on? Getting opinions. We talked about the fencing, and the reason we were showing those options is when I was talking with the Friends group last week, there was the concern about the question about whether there's another alternative to chain link. So that was why we were showing some of these other options. And the one in the top left corner, we did that recently at Mary Hannon Park, and there's a taller version around the basketball and a shorter version around the playground. So they tied in with each other. And it definitely gives it a different feel than chain link. Still can be, tying it into, it doesn't have to be yellow, but can tie into whatever else is going on to match the park. It could be black. But I just am curious what people's thoughts are on fence styles.
Well, maybe there are other versions of what is shown on the left-hand side, but I don't like what I see on the left-hand side. It looks like caging.
I have seen some slides that is being proposed for Clarendon Street Playground in Back Bay. And they have, I'm sure it's much more costly, but I actually feel like the budgets are very similar for the two projects. They have a proposal where it's wood, that it's still high. And there's a photo that was shared in one of these presentations that had it. But it looked gorgeous. So it was wood, and I'm sure there was younger children in the photo, so it probably wasn't as high as potentially being proposed. So it may not work at all. But it was an interesting way of just having a divider of two spaces.
Yeah, I can definitely look at it. I'm not sure that would work around basketball, even if it were shorter, just in terms of durability.
Yeah, but maybe around the kids area for some, or just as kind of thinking outside of the box.
Yeah, let me, I'll talk to Nate, who's the project manager for the Clarendon Street, just so that I can get a visual on what it is that he was showing. Kevin, is there anything else?
No, we addressed everything on my list. Adam, was there anything that we haven't talked about that you can think of? No?
No.
Well, it sounds like to me that we moved in the right direction on some things from our second meeting, and that there are still some concerns about the direction that we're heading for others. So what it sounds like to me is what I'd like to do is go back to the design team and have some meetings, talk about some of the thoughts and the concerns, maybe do a survey to try to get some clarification on a couple of the outstanding items. And then what I'd like to do is reach back out to you guys to talk through an alternative proposal for a park design. Does that work for everybody?
Sure.
Okay. For anybody who is on this Zoom that maybe I haven't emailed or isn't on my email list, please feel free to put your email in the chat, and I can make sure I can add you to all of my email correspondence too.
Lauren, this is Dave. Can I make one suggestion?
Sure.
I wasn't able to unmute quick enough when we were discussing the storage unit issue.
Yeah.
I would suggest you take a look at the storage space that was designed originally for the North End Dog Park in DiFilippo Playground on the flights there. They had there is like a decking platform with 3 steps that's against the back wall of the lower level of the dog park, and it has in it. It was constructed to have a storage space built in underneath it.
Okay.
And our experience over the last couple of years has been that it was woefully inadequate. Unless you have a really tall structure, taller than the 3 steps that the deck utilizes, it's basically just a crawl space that has serious accessibility issues and limited storage capacity. So it was, in addition to that, since the park gets sprinkled every night for sanitary reasons, being a dog park, the space under the deck was not waterproof. So you couldn't really store anything under there that was susceptible to damage from water. And all those factors led us to actually petition the Parks Department to install a more functional storage space that we got approval for and now utilize. It's a taller structure that has much more storage space and is weatherproof and relatively sturdy. So if you're thinking about combining a seating area with a storage space, I would advise against it. But take a look and see what's in the dog park.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good suggestion. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So does anybody else have any other thoughts for us tonight? Well, thank you guys all for joining. I'm going to once again put my email address in the chat, and then if anybody has anything further, please feel free to reach out to me as always, and I will keep you guys posted as to our next steps. And Christine also added in the link to the project webpage as well, which has everything from the first 2 meetings, and where this will also be posted in about a week. Thank you all.
team.
Yeah, thank you everyone for being here. This has been really helpful feedback for us.